The security guards were dragging me out of that building by my arms when the CEO's attack dog broke loose, charged across the lobby straight at them, and then stopped, put his body between me and the guards, and crawled to my feet, crying, whining, pressing his head into my legs like he was trying to climb inside my chest. A trained protection dog, an animal those guards were terrified of, and he was lying at the feet of the man being thrown out, shaking and crying. The whole lobby went dead silent. The guards let go of me, and I dropped to my knees on that marble floor and put my arms around that dog, and I started crying too, because I knew him. I knew that dog, and he knew me. He had known me the second I walked through the door, even though I hadn't seen him in 2 years, even though I'd thought I'd never see him again. Because that dog had once been mine, he was my partner. And finding him again, in the last place on earth I ever expected, in the middle of the worst moment of a very bad day, is the reason I'm telling you this story. I'd walked into that building one of the most beaten-down men in the city, and I would walk out of it whole again. And the thing that turned it around had 4 legs and a tail, and a memory that 2 years and a new owner couldn't erase. I still can't fully believe it happened, but a whole lobby of people watched it, and the best witness of all is currently lying across my feet as I tell you this, snoring, exactly where he belongs. I'm going to tell you the whole thing, who that dog was, how I lost him, how he ended up guarding the lobby of a corporation, and what the CEO did when she came down and found her fearsome attack dog weeping at the feet of a man her guards were throwing out. But more than that, this is a story about loyalty, the kind that doesn't forget, the kind that waits, the kind that knows you even when the whole world has decided you're nobody. Before I start, one quick thing. I spent a lot of years working alongside a partner who never once needed me to explain myself. So I've gotten out of the habit of big speeches, and I'll keep this short. If you've ever loved an animal-like family, or ever been recognized and loved by someone when you felt like you'd become invisible, then this story is for you. Stay to the end. There's a subscribe button down there, and I'll trust you to know by then whether it's earned. Now, let me tell you about Ranger. My name is Russ Calder. I'm 39 years old, and for most of my adult life I was a police K-9 handler. That means I was a cop who worked with a dog, a specially trained police dog, my partner, the 2 of us a single unit, working together every single day. And my partner for years was a German Shepherd named Ranger. And I need you to understand that Ranger was not just a work animal to me. When you're a K-9 handler, your dog lives with you. He's not kenneled at the station. He comes home with you every night. He becomes part of your family. Ranger ate in my kitchen, slept in my house, and was, for years, as much a member of my family as any person. My son grew up with that dog. People who haven't done the work don't understand the bond between a handler and his dog. Your life is in that dog's care, and his is in yours, and you learn to read each other down to the smallest flick of an ear. When we worked, we didn't need words, a glance, a shift of weight, and we both knew what the other would do. You don't train that kind of trust into an animal. You build it over years until the 2 of you aren't quite 2 anymore. Ranger was the most reliable presence in my adult life. I used to joke that he was the most dependable member of the household, and the truth is it wasn't a joke at all. My son's name is Charlie. He's 7 years old, and he is the center of my whole world. And Charlie had Ranger from the time he was a baby. That dog was Charlie's protector, his pillow, his best friend, the warm, furry mountain he learned to walk by, pulling himself up on. Charlie has no memory of a time before Ranger, because for the first 5 years of his life, Ranger was simply always there. 100 pounds of gentle, watchful devotion lying beside his bed every single night. To Charlie, Ranger wasn't my police partner. Ranger was his dog, his brother, part of the furniture of a happy childhood. I have 100 memories of the 2 of them. Charlie learning to walk by grabbing fistfuls of Ranger's fur and hauling himself up, and Ranger holding perfectly still so a baby could use him as a handrail. When Charlie had nightmares, he didn't come to me first. He went to Ranger, and I'd find them in the morning, the boy wrapped around the dog, both asleep. There are dogs that are pets, and there are dogs that decide a specific small human is theirs to protect with their whole life, and Ranger was the second kind. Charlie was his, as fixed a fact of our household as the sunrise. And then, over the span of about a year, I lost almost everything. First, I lost my wife. Charlie's mother, my Annie, passed away 2 years ago. I'm not going to dwell on it because it's still hard to talk about, but losing her broke something in me and in our home that has never fully healed, and it left me a single father to a little boy who suddenly only had one parent. Through all of that grief, you know who never left Charlie's side? Ranger. That dog seemed to understand that the little boy was hurting, and he glued himself to Charlie, slept pressed against him, followed him room to room. In the worst months of our lives, that dog was a source of comfort I will never be able to repay. There's a memory from that time I've never told anyone. In the very worst stretch after Annie passed, there were nights I'd get Charlie to sleep and then sit alone in the dark kitchen and just come apart quietly. Because that's the only time a single dad gets to fall apart, when the kid's asleep. And every one of those nights Ranger would come and sit against my leg. He wouldn't make a sound. He'd just lean his whole weight into me, this solid, warm presence, and put his head on my knee and stay. He somehow understood that I couldn't break down in front of my grieving son, that I had to be the strong one all day, and that I needed somewhere to put it all when the day was done. He became that place. A dog carried the part of my grief I couldn't show anyone, night after night, and asked nothing for it. So, when I tell you losing him on top of losing Annie nearly finished me, understand that he wasn't just my partner and Charlie's best friend. He was, in the darkest hours, the only one holding me up. Losing him felt like losing the last hand that was keeping me on my feet. And getting him back 2 years later felt like that hand reaching out of an elevator lobby and catching me again, right as I'd given up on ever being caught. And then, not long after I lost Annie, I lost my career. I got hurt on the job, a serious injury in the line of duty, the kind you don't fully come back from. I'll spare you the details, but the upshot was that my body couldn't do the work anymore, and I was medically retired from the force. One day, I was a K-9 officer, and the next I was a disabled single dad with no job and a pension that didn't stretch nearly far enough. But here's the part that broke my heart the most. Because of how these things work, when I was medically retired, and right around the same time the department was making cuts to the K-9 unit, I lost Ranger too. Ranger was still young, still healthy, still in his prime working years, and the rules and the budgets being what they were, he wasn't retired out to me. He was a valuable trained asset, and in the shuffle of the unit being downsized, he was transferred, sold, essentially, transitioned out to a private security company that used trained dogs. And I, freshly disabled, freshly widowed, drowning in medical bills and grief, with no income, did not have the standing or the money to stop it or to buy him back. I tried, God knows I tried. But I was a broken man at the bottom of the worst year of his life, and the machine just moved my dog along to its next owner, and there was nothing I could do. I will never forget the day they took him. Charlie cried like his heart was breaking, because in the space of 1 year his mother was gone and now his dog was being taken too, and he could not understand why, and I had no good answer, because there was no good answer. Ranger looked back at me as they loaded him up, this confused, betrayed look, like he couldn't understand why his person was letting this happen, and I had to stand there and let it, because I had no choice, and it remains one of the great shames and sorrows of my life. I lost my wife, my career, and my partner, all in about a year. I want to tell you about the worst part of the day they took him, the part I've never been able to shake. It wasn't the paperwork or the unfairness of it, though that was bad enough. It was the look. When they loaded Ranger into that transport vehicle, he kept looking back at me, and his whole body was asking a question I couldn't answer. In our years together, I had been the one constant he could trust absolutely. I had never once let anything bad happen to him that I could prevent. And now strangers were taking him away, and I was just standing there, not stopping it. And I could see him trying to understand it, trying to make it fit with everything he knew about me, and not being able to. A dog can't understand budgets and bureaucracy and medical retirement. All he understood was that his person was letting him be taken, and he didn't fight it, because he trusted me even then, even as I failed him, And that trust was the thing that gutted me. I would have given anything to explain it to him, to tell him it wasn't my choice, that I was as broken about it as he was. But you can't explain to a dog. You can only stand there and watch the trust in his eyes ask why, and have no answer, and let them drive him away. I've replayed that look 10,000 times. For 2 years, I carried the certainty that somewhere out there was a dog who thought I'd abandoned him, and that I would never get the chance to tell him I hadn't. And the partner, the dog, I'd made my peace as much as you can, that I would never see him again. He was somewhere out there in the world, working for somebody else, and I was here, trying to hold what was left of my little family together with 2 hands that didn't work as well as they used to. So, that's the man I was, 2 years later, when I walked into the lobby of that corporation. A disabled, widowed, former K-9 cop, scraping by, who had come to apply for a job, a security consulting position, something I was actually qualified for, one of the few things my body could still do, advising on security systems and protocols. I needed the work badly. Charlie and I were barely getting by. I'd put on my one good jacket, the one that still fit over the hardware in my shoulder, and I'd come to try to convince these people to give a banged-up ex-cop a chance. And it went wrong immediately. Because the head of security for this company was a man, I'll call him Bryce, who was exactly the kind of guy who gives security a bad name. All swagger, all suspicion, the type who treats every person who walks in the door like a threat he gets to neutralize. And Bryce took one look at me, and I'll be honest, I don't present like a polished corporate guy. I'm a beat-up former street cop. I move stiff because of my injury. I've got a certain look. And he decided instantly that I was a problem. I was in the wrong place. Probably some vagrant, some troublemaker, somebody who didn't belong in his shiny lobby. He didn't ask me my business. He didn't check whether I had an appointment, which I did. He just decided. And he signaled to 2 of his guards, and they came over, and despite my trying to explain that I was there for an interview, that I had an appointment, that there'd been a misunderstanding, Bryce told them to remove me. And these 2 big guys took me by the arms, one on each side, and started physically dragging me toward the doors, with me protesting, trying to keep my dignity, a disabled man being hauled across a marble lobby like a piece of trash while the whole place watched. It was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. I'd given 20 years to public service, I'd been a decorated officer, and here I was being dragged out of a building by my arms because a man with a power complex didn't like my face. And the thing about a humiliation like that is what it does inside you, on top of the outside of it. Because the truth is, after 2 years of losses, some part of me had started to half believe the story those guards were writing about me with their hands, that I was a nobody now, that the decorated officer was gone, and what was left was just a banged-up, broke, used-up man that important people in nice buildings got to throw out. When you fall far enough, the worst damage isn't to your circumstances, it's to your sense of your own worth. I'd been a man who mattered, who protected people, whose work meant something, and I'd been slowly convinced, by injury and grief and poverty and 100 closed doors, that all of that was behind me, that I should lower my expectations of how the world would treat me. So, as those 2 men hauled me across that marble, I wasn't even fighting much anymore. Some defeated part of me was thinking, of course, this is who I am now, a man who gets dragged out. That is the lowest I have ever felt about myself. Lower even than grief, because grief at least knows it once had something good. This was the feeling of believing I no longer did, and that exact moment of believing I was nobody, is the moment a dog came across a lobby to tell me I was wrong. And that exact moment is when I heard it. A bark. But not just any bark. A specific bark from somewhere across the lobby that hit me in the spine before my brain even caught up. Because it was a sound I knew, a sound I'd know anywhere, a sound I'd heard 10,000 times. And then the sound of claws scrabbling on marble, fast, getting closer, and shouting. A handler shouting a command, shouting it again, more urgently, the dog not obeying. And I turned my head, and coming across that lobby at a dead run was a German shepherd, dragging his handler, who'd lost grip on the leash, and the guards holding me tensed up because a big protection dog was charging right at us. And I looked at that dog, really looked, in the half-second I had, and my heart stopped. Because I knew that gait. I knew that face. I knew the particular pattern on his coat, and the one ear that sat slightly different, and the whole entire shape of him in my soul. It was Ranger. It was my Ranger. And here is what that dog did, and I swear to you every word of it is true, because the whole lobby saw it. He did not attack me. He came in fast and hard, and the guards flinched back, but Ranger planted himself. He put his body squarely between me and those two guards, and he turned to face them, and he made it absolutely, unmistakably clear with his whole body and a low warning sound that they were not to touch me anymore. He didn't bite anyone. He didn't have to. 100-pound protection dog placing himself in front of you and telling two men to back off does not need to bite anyone. They let go of my arms and stepped back fast. And then, the second those guards let go of me, the whole thing changed. Because Ranger turned around away from the guards, and he looked up at me, and I watched the recognition hit him all the way through, the same way it had hit me, and this fearsome professional protection dog completely fell apart. He started crying. There's no other word for it. He made these high, broken whining sounds, and he crawled to me, low to the ground, his whole back end wagging so hard he could barely walk, and he pressed himself into my legs, shoving his head against me, climbing at me, crying and crying, 2 years of missing his person pouring out of him all at once. And I went down. My bad shoulder be damned, I dropped to my knees on that marble floor, and I wrapped my arms around my dog, my partner, my Ranger, and I buried my face in his fur, and I cried like I have not cried since the day we buried Annie, because I never thought I'd see him again. I had grieved this dog. I had made my peace with never knowing what happened to him. And here he was, in my arms, crying into my neck. And the whole rest of the world, the guards, the lobby, the humiliation, Bryce, all of it just disappeared. And it was only me and my dog who had found each other again against impossible odds. I kept saying his name into his fur, "Ranger, it's me. Buddy, I've got you." And he kept making these high keening cries I'd never heard in all our years of work. The sound of an animal who had held something in for 2 years, finally getting to let it out. And kneeling there, I realized he had been grieving too. I'd spent 2 years telling myself he'd adjusted, moved on, the way we tell ourselves animals do. But that was a lie I'd told myself to make it bearable. He'd been missing me exactly as much as I'd been missing him, the same hole, for the same 2 years. And now, by some impossible accident, here we were on a marble floor, both of us shaking, the grief turning itself inside out into the purest joy I have ever felt. Holding that dog on that floor is on the short list of the most overwhelming moments of my entire life. The whole lobby was frozen, dead silent, watching a beat-up man who'd just been getting thrown out as a vagrant kneeling on the floor, weeping into the fur of the company's fearsome attack dog, while that dog cried and wagged and pressed against him like he'd never let go again. The guards didn't know what to do. Bryce didn't know what to do. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. I learned later that people in that lobby were quietly wiping their eyes, strangers who had no idea what they were even looking at, just that it was something that reached right into the chest. There is something about the sight of a reunion like that, a love that survived a long separation, that bypasses your brain entirely and goes straight to the part of you that knows what it is to lose something and want it back. Nobody knew the story yet. Nobody knew this was a police dog and his handler, or that there'd been a dead wife and a career-ending injury and 2 years of grief behind it. They just saw a fearsome dog crying in the arms of a man who'd been getting thrown out a moment before, and they understood, without a single fact, that they were watching something true. That's the thing about real love. You can feel it across a room in total strangers, with no context at all. It announces itself. The whole lobby felt it, and the whole lobby went silent in front of it, the way people go quiet in a church. And that's when the elevator opened, and the CEO walked out. Her name was Diane Keller, and she was the head of the whole company, and she had come down because there was some commotion in her lobby. And she stopped, and she took in this impossible scene. Her guards standing back looking stunned, her head of security red-faced and sputtering, and her company's protection dog lying in the arms of a crying man on the floor. And she said, "What in the world is going on here?" And the handler, the dog's handler, who was as stunned as anyone, said the thing that started to unravel the whole truth. He said, "Ma'am, I've never seen him do anything like this. This dog does not break. He doesn't disobey. He doesn't approach strangers. He's all business. I've handled him for 2 years, and he has never, not once, it's like he knows this man." And I looked up from the floor, still holding my dog, tears running down my face, and I said the only thing I could say. I said, "He does know me. His name is Ranger. He was my partner for 6 years. I'm the one who raised him. I'm the one who trained him. I lost him 2 years ago, and I never thought I'd see him again." And Ranger, hearing me say his name, his real name, the name only I called him, pressed in harder and cried, as if to confirm every word. You could have heard a pin drop in that lobby. Diane Keller looked at me, and she looked at that dog falling apart with joy in my arms, and she was a smart woman, and she understood immediately that she was looking at something true and something important. She crouched down, in her expensive suit, right down on the floor near us, and she watched Ranger for a moment, the way he was wrapped around me, the way 2 years of separation was pouring out of him, and her own eyes filled up. And she said quietly, "I think you'd better come up to my office and tell me everything." So I did. With Ranger glued to my side, refusing to leave me for even a second, growling softly if anyone came near, I went up to that office and I told Diane Keller the whole story. About being a K-9 handler. About Ranger living with us, being part of our family, sleeping next to my son's bed for 5 years. About losing my wife. About getting hurt and being medically retired. About how, in the chaos of it all, my partner had been transferred away to a security company, and how I'd been too broken and too broke to stop it, and how my little boy had cried for weeks, and how I'd grieved this dog and made my peace and never, ever expected to walk into a random corporate lobby and find him standing guard. And as I talked, Diane Keller's face went through something, because she was learning, in real time, that the fierce protection dog her company had bought, the one that didn't break, the one that was all business, was a grieving animal who'd been torn away from his family and had spent 2 years being a professional because that's all anyone had left him, and the very second, his actual person walked back through a door, all that professionalism had dissolved into a crying dog crawling across a floor. And then Diane did the thing that tells you who she really was. She didn't hesitate. She said, "Mr. Calder, that is your dog. Anyone with eyes can see that this dog is yours. He was taken from you at the worst moment of your life, and that was wrong, however legal it was. I am not going to be one more person who keeps him from you." And she told me, right there, that she was returning Ranger to me, that I was taking my dog home, that day, for good. I want you to understand how rare what she did was, because it would have been so easy for her to do the other thing. Ranger was, on paper, company property. A trained protection dog represents a serious investment, tens of thousands of dollars, a real working asset her security operation relied on. By every cold calculation, the business move was to keep the dog, express sympathy, and send me on my way. No one would have blamed her. No law required her to give him up. She could have offered me visiting rights, or nothing at all, and been entirely within her rights. Instead, she looked at a crying dog wrapped around a broken stranger on her lobby floor, and she saw, instantly, the only truth that actually mattered, which was that this animal belonged to this man and had been waiting 2 years to come home. And she chose that truth over the asset on her balance sheet without so much as a pause. She told me later that it wasn't even a hard decision. She said, "I have never in my life seen anything make the right thing as obvious as that dog made it. Anyone who could have watched that and kept the dog has something wrong with them." That's the kind of person Diane Keller turned out to be. She saw a living creature's heart in a man's grief, and she valued them above money, immediately, without calculating, and there are not as many people like that in the world as there should be. I broke down all over again. I tried to find words to thank her and couldn't, because she was handing me back a piece of my family I thought was gone forever. She was handing my son back his best friend. She was handing me back my partner, but Diane wasn't finished, and this is where it goes from a miracle to a whole new life. First, she dealt with Bryce. She had watched her head of security drag a disabled, decorated former police officer, a man who had an appointment, a man who'd come to apply for a job, across her lobby like garbage, based on nothing but the man's appearance. And she was not a woman who would tolerate that in her company. She addressed it directly and seriously. Bryce, let's just say, was held fully accountable for how he'd treated me, and for the culture of contempt he'd been running in that lobby. Diane made it clear that judging and brutalizing people based on how they look was not what her company was going to be. And I'll be honest with you about how I felt about Bryce, because it might not be what you expect. I didn't want him destroyed. I'd spent 20 years in a uniform, and I'd seen what fear and a little power do to people, how they can turn a man into someone who needs to push others down to feel tall. Bryce wasn't worth my hatred. But there's a difference between forgiving a man and letting him keep the power to do it again to the next disabled veteran, the next tired stranger, the next person who walks in not looking the way he thinks people should look. Diane understood that difference exactly. She wasn't cruel about it, but she was clear. A person who treats the vulnerable with contempt does not get to run security in a building with her name on it. Bryce thought power was about who you could throw out. Diane showed me real power is about who you protect and what you refuse to allow. And then she turned to me, and she asked me what I'd actually come there for, and I told her the security consulting job, the position I was qualified for, the work I could still do. And Diane Keller looked at me, this former K-9 handler with 20 years of experience whose own trained dog had just chosen him over an entire security team, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, I came down to my lobby to find out why there was chaos, and what I found was that the most loyal, capable security professional in this building is the man my idiot of a security chief was throwing out, and the proof is currently drooling on your shoes. And she didn't give me the consulting job I'd come for. She gave me a better one, a real position running and training part of her company's K-9 security program. Leading it, the exact thing I was best at in the whole world. The thing my injury had taken from me, handed back in a form my body could still do. She wanted me to build and train her dog program, with my own partner at my side. Do you understand what that meant? It meant I got Ranger back and I got to work with him again. It meant my partner and I were a unit again, except now we went home every night to Charlie. It meant stable, dignified, well-paid work, doing the thing I loved, the thing I was made for. In one single afternoon, I went from a disabled man being dragged out of a lobby as a vagrant to a man with his dog back, his calling back, and a real future for his son. And none of it was charity. Diane was very clear about that. She didn't hire me because she felt sorry for me. She hired me because she'd just watched the single most convincing demonstration of a security professional's bond and skill she'd ever seen, and she'd be a fool not to want that running her program. And that mattered to me more than I can say, that it wasn't pity. A proud man, beaten down by 2 hard years, doesn't want to be rescued. He wants to be seen as still capable, still good at something. Diane didn't say, in so many words, that she wanted to help me. She said she wanted me working for her because I was clearly excellent at this. The injury had taken the street work from me, but it hadn't taken my training, my eye, my ability to build a program and train good dogs and good handlers. Diane saw all of that, where Bryce had seen a vagrant to throw out. She gave me back not just a job, but my own sense of myself as someone who still had something to offer. But you want to know the best part? The best part wasn't the job. The best part was that night. The best part was bringing Ranger home and watching my son Charlie, who was now 7, who'd lost his mother and then lost his dog in the worst year of his life, open the front door and see Ranger standing there. Charlie froze. He didn't believe it. And then he screamed Ranger's name and dropped to the floor, and 100 pounds of German Shepherd hit him like a freight train of love, and the two of them rolled around on the floor of our living room, my son sobbing and laughing at the same time, the dog crying those same high, happy cries, and I stood in the doorway and watched a piece of my son that had been broken for 2 years click back into place. You have to understand. Charlie had handled losing his mother and losing his dog the way children often do, which is to seem to cope on the surface while something underneath quietly closes up. He'd gotten quieter over those 2 years. Less silly, more careful, the way a kid gets when the world has taught him too early that the things you love can be taken with no warning. I'd watched it happen and been unable to stop it, this slow dimming of my bright boy, and I'd told myself it was just growing up, even though I knew it wasn't. And in the span of about 10 seconds, watching Ranger barrel into him and the two of them go down in a heap of fur and limbs and joy, I watched 2 years of that careful dimming just blow away. He laughed from a place I hadn't heard him laugh from since before Annie died, this pure, helpless, whole-bodied little kid laugh, and he was crying at the same time and saying Ranger's name over and over into the dog's neck, and Ranger was crying right back, and I stood there in the doorway and absolutely came apart. Because I had been able to give my son so little of what he'd lost. I couldn't give him his mother back. I couldn't undo any of the hard years. But somehow, by the grace of a dog's loyal heart and a stranger's good one, I got to give him this. His brother, his best friend, the warm, furry constant of his whole childhood, walking back through the front door. There are not many perfect moments in a life. That was one of mine. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Ranger slept next to Charlie's bed, exactly where he'd slept for the first 5 years of my boy's life, like he'd never left. And I stood in the hallway and looked at them, my son and his dog, both finally whole again, and I thanked God and Diane Keller and the loyal heart of one German shepherd who never forgot us. I think about it all the time now, about how that dog knew me. 2 years. 2 years being a professional protection dog for another company, handled every day by another man, and the instant I walked through that door, from all the way across a lobby he knew his person, he knew his family. All that time, under all that training and all that work he had been carrying us with him, waiting, remembering. The world had processed him as an asset, transferred him, reassigned him, and none of it had touched the thing underneath, which was a heart that belonged to a little boy and a broken cop and was just waiting to come home. And here's what that taught me, the thing I most want to leave you with. There is a kind of loyalty that does not care about your circumstances. That does not care that you got hurt, that you lost your job, that you're broke, that you're being dragged out of a building as a nobody. Ranger didn't see a disabled vagrant being removed by security. He saw his person, exactly as worthy of his devotion as the day we met, and he crossed a lobby and put his body on the line to get back to me. We should all be so lucky as to be loved like that by someone. And we should all try to love like that, with a loyalty that sees past what the world says a person has become, straight to who they really are. That dog reminded me, at the lowest moment of a low 2 years, that I was still somebody worth crossing a room for. Sometimes you need someone to remind you of that. Sometimes that someone has 4 legs and a tail. Because every one of us at some point goes through a stretch where the world stops seeing our worth, until even we start to forget who we are underneath it all. We get dragged across our own lobbies one way or another, and we start to believe the people doing the dragging. What I learned on that marble floor is that your worth was never gone. It was just unseen. The decorated officer was still in me the whole time those guards were hauling me out. I just half stopped being able to see him myself. And it took a creature who loved me without conditions to come crashing across a room and insist on the man I still was, loudly, in front of everyone, until I remembered too. That's what real love does. It doesn't restore your worth never left. It just sees it when you'd forgotten and refuses to let you forget. Tell me in the comments about an animal who loved you like family, or a reunion that broke you open, or a time someone recognized your worth when the world had written you off. I read every single one of them, late at night with Ranger snoring beside me, and the ones about dogs get me every single time, without fail. And listen, I'm a man of few words, like I said, so I'll make my last ones count. If this story moved you, the subscribe button is right there, and I'd be glad to have you ride along for the next one. Until then, here's the one thing I want you to carry out of this. Somewhere in your life there is someone, a person, or maybe a dog asleep at your feet right now, who loves the real you, the one underneath your job and your luck and your worst 2 years. The people and the dogs who love you for real don't love your circumstances. They love you. Hold on to the ones who'd cross a lobby for you, and try your best to be one of them for somebody else.